My name is Jeannie Bradner, and I am the Deputy Administrator overseeing the Juvenile Services Division of Administrative Office of Probation. Welcome everyone to hearing more about the multisystemic therapy services. I wanted to just give a quick intro and history of the process and the project. As many of you are aware, probation has been highly engaged in the juvenile reform efforts since the implementation of statutory changes of LB 561 and 464 with the goal of reducing safely our out-of-home placements for youth and at the same time increasing those services for youth to remain in their homes, schools, and communities. So in partnership with the Court Improvement Division, and we have been looking down the road of how can we bring additional services to Nebraska, how can we fund those training costs, those services that we know produced great outcomes, but build some sustainability for not only funding the services, but also for looking at adding those additional pieces to the continuum. The Nebraska Court Improvement Project is the lead on this process and has secured grant funding for the implementation of the multisystemic therapy services. And for those of you who have not yet seen the announcement, Deb Van Dyke-Reese was recently named the new director for the Court Improvement Project, so we're really excited to have Deb and the entire Court Improvement Project engaged in this team. We will be talking about the overview of multisystemic therapy. Some of you may have seen already that a request for qualifications has been posted on our Judicial Branch website, and a more formal email and link will be sent to providers in the coming days as well in case you have not yet received that. So those of you that are on the call today, if you haven't already looked at that, that would be a good place to start for the RFQ process. All right, Marshall, I'm going to go ahead and mute on my end and turn it over to you. Thank you all.
Well, very good. First of all, I'll introduce myself. My name is Marshall Swenson. I work as a program developer for MST Services, and I'm based in Charleston, South Carolina. I would like to thank everybody for taking the time today to attend this webinar, and I would like to start by saying, making a reference to a group of researchers known as the National Implementation Research Network. And the reason I'm referring to them is that they are a group that's actually paying attention to not what people are doing, but how well they're able to implement and replicate. And they have a simple formula. And that formula says that you have to start with something that's proven to work. And then, once you have something that you know works, then you have to do it well and with a high degree of fidelity. The third component that is necessary is what they refer to as an enabling environment. And the enabling environment would be the community and the collaborative nature of the community in which a program is implemented. And when you have do what works, do it well, and in a supportive environment, that is the key to getting good client outcomes, and that's what we're really all about here. So the webinar today is going to define multisystemic therapy and give you some ideas as to how we know and why we know that it works. We're going to talk a little bit about how we do things that assist programs implementing this model to do the implementation with a high degree of fidelity. So we have something that can work, and we have research to prove it. We have something that can work for you if it's done well. And the thing that is one of the challenges that you'll face if you're making a decision to do this program is to determine how to build that enabling environment in your community so that MST can get the kinds of outcomes that you're aiming for the young people. So you see on the first slide it says that MST aims to break the cycle of criminal behavior by keeping teenagers at home, in school, and out of trouble. So MST, by the way, I'm making an assumption here. I suspect that many of you have already read something about MST or know something about MST, but I can't make the assumption that everybody has. And so some of what I'll be presenting is just sort of the basic understanding of MST, not in any great detail. Certainly there's other references that you can get to learn more about it, but today we're really going to be talking about enough of an overview so that we have a common understanding of what it is that we're talking about implementing, and then we can go from there. So MST is a community-based, family-driven treatment that is specifically designed for young people with behavior that is often termed antisocial or delinquent. Those are the kids that are getting in trouble, and that the kind of problem behaviors that they're exhibiting are putting them at risk for being placed outside of their own home, in jails or residential treatment facilities, etc. MST focuses on empowering the parents or caregivers, and this is somewhat different from some approaches, and we'll show you more later in the presentation a bit more about these differences. But understand that MST realizes, and our philosophy realizes, that no matter how much treatment a young person gets, at the end of treatment, the treatment provider will go away and the parents will be left to continue whatever progress has been made. And so our type of treatment essentially starts with empowering the caregiver, and with the caregiver by our side, understanding why the young person is getting involved in these types of behaviors, and then together with the caregiver, finding ways to solve those problems, and to do so in a way that the caregiver by the end of treatment has the skills, the resources, and the supports of their natural ecology to be able to continue what they're doing as a part of this treatment. So in order to do that, MST has to define the client not as just the young person, and really not as just the family, but we define as our client the entire social ecology that surrounds this young person. And that social ecology includes family, it includes their friends, the school, the neighborhood they live in, the community that they live in. All of those systems must be in sync in order for us to be able to manage this young person onto a more pro-social, successful path in life. And in order to do that, we'll talk a little bit about the structured clinical supervision and quality assurance process that MST employs, so you get a sense of what that's about. Now, there will be in the RFQ a very specific definition of the kids who will qualify for this program. The slide that you see here is the slide that is provided by the treatment model about factors that would qualify a young person for this service, and also those factors that would exclude a young person from this service. I'll say a bit about those things. But as you'll see over on the inclusionary side, youth that are at risk for placement, as I said before, and for delinquent behaviors, and by the way, this includes behaviors that involve substance use and misuse. And MST has been recognized in the United States as a very successful treatment for adolescent drug misuse. And so we'll talk a bit more about the implications of that later on. We're looking for youth involved in the juvenile justice system, but we do have sites that implement MST with kids that might be described as pre-delinquent, and that is they have the characteristics, substance misuse, severe school problems, that sort of thing, but the one thing that they lack is an actual arrest. Now, in Nebraska, I believe that the inclusionary criteria will require that the young person actually already be in the system. And so for the current implementation, I believe that will be the case. We would also include young people who have committed sexual-related offenses if those were committed in the context of an overwhelming pattern of delinquent or antisocial behavior. You'll notice over on the exclusionary criteria that we also mentioned sex offending in the absence of other antisocial behavior. So if you have a young person that is committing inappropriate sexual behaviors, but they're doing fine in school and they're not committing any other crime, blah blah blah, then MST is probably not for them. But oftentimes when people are involved in a pattern of delinquent behavior, somewhere along the line, one of the things that they might do is pick up some type of a sexually related offense as well. So it's part of a larger pattern. They're usually included. If it's a lone behavior, probably not. We do exclude youth that are living independently because if you'll remember, the change agent with this whole system is going to be the parent. And so a youth living independently would lack the necessary change agent for long-term sustainability. We also differentiate between those behaviors that are organic in nature, that are part of the hardwiring of the young person. So a young person with moderate to severe autism, or oftentimes defined as significant difficulties with social communication, interaction, repetitive behaviors, and they fall on that autism spectrum. Those young people, the reason for their behavior is more organic and less social ecological in nature. And so we typically would not accept them into the program. Not because we don't think they need services, it's because we know that the services that we provide have not been developed in a way that would adequately meet their needs. The same is true for those people who are experiencing severe psychiatric problems, particularly people who are actively homicidal, suicidal, or psychotic. But also, if you'll think of it this way, if the placement that we're trying to prevent is a psychiatric hospitalization, then the standard MST as it's been developed for this project would not be significant enough to be able to meet their medical needs. And so we would generally exclude those young people. Now, we have had instances where there are psychiatric problems in the history of a young person, but what they're being referred for is more antisocial behavior, and that would be they're stealing, breaking into people's homes, and so forth. And if they've had a psychiatric history, we would look for evidence that the current behaviors are not related to that. For example, a young person who is maybe taking psychotropic medication, but the symptoms related to that medication are well controlled, then it would not necessarily be an exclusion. So moving on, the MST treatment model has some basic assumptions, and that is that children's behavior is strongly influenced by the families, the friends, and the community that they are a part of. And there's another slide that talks a little bit more about that. But just think of it this way, that we believe that in addition to the characteristics that the young person brings to the table, behavior is by far more determined by the environment than it is by the initial characteristics, particularly for those young people that are engaging in antisocial behavior. Number two, we assume that families and communities are central and essential partners and collaborators in MST treatment. Our goal is that by the end of treatment, that the people that exist in the young person's natural ecology will be sufficient to be able to meet their ongoing needs. We assume that caregivers and parents want what's best for their children, and they want them to grow to be healthy and productive adults. Understand that oftentimes when young people and their families are referred for services, this is not the first time they've seen the service system. And almost by definition, they're being referred because any service that's been provided previously didn't work. And so and we oftentimes, the first time we meet with families, they may have been engaged in a fairly long and drawn-out struggle with their young person, and so we may not see necessarily overt signs of love and caring. As a matter of fact, in some cases, parents may even state that they're looking for somebody else to pick up the ball and not for us. And so we understand that it's our job to engage those families in an effort that will actually result in a better outcome for them. And that's our job. It's not their job to come to us. It's our job to engage them. We have an assumption that families can live successfully without formal mandated services, and that is that we're not trying to create an addiction to services. We're trying to create independence from the services that are not necessarily included in the day-to-day lives of all families. We believe that change can occur quickly. We don't buy into the old notion that it took years to get here, it's going to take years to get out. We believe in a fairly reasonably rapid change process if it's well managed and well guided. We also believe that professional treatment providers should be held accountable for achieving outcomes. And that's something that is challenging our industry a little bit, but understand that from MST Services perspective, we are joining the team that should be held accountable for those outcomes. We have a very specific role to play as part of that team, and we'll talk more about that later. We also have a very strong bias toward science and research because we believe and have strong evidence to support that if you use a scientific method to build the treatment model, you use elements of the scientific method to implement the model, you will learn what works and what doesn't work, and it will permit you to be able to do more of what works. I'm just going to check in for a second. If everybody's muted, I'm getting some feedback noise, so if you haven't muted, please do so. The next slide talks about the families as a solution, and I mentioned before we do focus on the caregivers, and I would say probably in the neighborhood of 90% of our interventions are targeting the parents of the young person. But it doesn't mean the young person's not getting any treatment. For example, let's say a young person's not fitting well into a classroom setting because of poor social skills. While our therapist would be very well trained to teach social skills, we believe that it's a better path to be able to ensure that the parents have the skills to train the social skills and also to expect positive social skills. It may take a little longer to get the parents into the position of meeting that need, but if we're able to skill up the parents to be able to do that, then when we leave, it'll keep happening. That's the whole point of why we would do that. So they are collaborators. We stand side by side. We don't blame families. We first seek to understand how they came to be the way that they are. And we don't give up on families, and that's another cornerstone. And I've seen other examples in the service system of programs that don't give up on families, and I'm very glad to see that. But how it comes out with us is that if families come to us and say, we're tired, we want to drop out, that we take extreme and extraordinary measures to engage them because we feel like that engagement is our job. It's not, again, it's not their responsibility, it's our responsibility. And we take a very customer service perspective on this, and that is that customers of any business or any service tend to go back if they find value. They tend to not come back if they don't find value. And it's our job to ensure that we know what value they need and that we bring that value. And so we don't label as resistant or unmotivated. We merely seek to understand and engage. And indeed, we have a strong track record of engagement, even in our research projects, but also in our day-to-day implementation of MST. One of the things that we track on every family that's treated is we track when treatment was terminated, why was it terminated, and if it was terminated because of a lack of engagement, then that empowers us to do something about it, doing a better job of engaging families. Moving to the next slide is, this is a slide that really describes the social ecological model that was brought to us through the teachings of Uri Bronfenbrenner. Basically, this graphic shows that kids are embedded in multiple systems and that they are influenced by the people that they come into contact with in those systems. But all systems don't have an equal power of influence. And so you look at the child, the most powerful influence is going to be family members and siblings. The next would be extended family members. The next would be their peer group. And interestingly enough, in adolescence, the peer group is probably more powerful than at any other point in a person's life. And that is, it's at the age of adolescence that kids want to fit in. They want to find who their friends are, and they want to be accepted by those friends. So it's a very powerful influence, and any time that you get the friends being more powerful than the families or parents, you have problems. But more specifically, problems if that peer group is a relatively negative peer group, and that's the kids that we come into contact with. Outside of that, neighborhoods where drugs and weapons and violence is freely a part of the environment, that can be very powerful as an influence. Schools are powerful, but not as powerful because they're not in all year round, and there's lots of natural transitions from one grade to the next, one school to the next, that limits the long-term influence on behaviors. We include the next circle out as the provider agency, and we do this this is not something that Bronfenbrenner said, but we've inserted this for this reason. And that is, for us to believe that we will be a powerful long-term influence on this young person is foolish, because even with an average length of treatment of around 4 months, we are never going to be as powerful as those systems that are closer to the child on a day-to-day basis. And so we have to say our primary alliance, as opposed to being with the child, has to be with the principal caregiver, because it's the caregiver that's going to have to negotiate and manage all these relationships when we're done. On the outside, the community is another part of all this, and what that refers to is something that can be unique to every different community in Nebraska, and that is their attitudes toward young people, their attitudes toward juvenile crime, and the policies and processes that they have in place, and the resources that are available, all are somewhat different and populated by different people from one community to the next. So it's our job to find out who these people are and get them engaged in a positive, collaborative effort. We also look at there's a model of juvenile delinquency. This is called a causal model. The research that's been done on this was done to be able to predict under what circumstances would a young person likely commit criminal activity in the future. And it turns out that the two biggest predictors are prior delinquent behavior and the behavior of the people that the young person calls friends. And we can't do anything about the prior behavior because it's an historic fact. But we can influence who the young person hangs around with, and the factors that are related to that are school and family factors. And so we'll look a little bit about what some of those factors are, not in great depth, but this comes out of research that we didn't do. This is more than a half century of research that basically says that there are very identifiable characteristics in the context of each of these systems that are both understandable and amenable to some type of change. And you see some examples here, like in the family, low monitoring, high conflict. In the peer group, the kids are breaking the law or using drugs. In the school, there are schools that have high dropout rates or low achievement rates, and these things are very influential. And then the community supports the transiency of the neighborhood that they live in, the degree to which their family is integrated into the neighborhood. And then, of course, at the bottom, the characteristics and skills of the individual. Those are all factors that that create, increase or decrease or mediate the risk of a young person's involvement in juvenile justice system. So our change model looks just like this. That is, MST first focuses on improving the family relationships and getting the parents very clearly in charge of their family and the environment of the young people that live in that family. And then through the parent, we can improve the relationship between the youth and family and the peer group, school, and community. And with positive relationships there, meaning that we're reducing the negative influence and increasing the positive influences from those systems, that's what will reduce behavior and also maintain the behavior as changed in the long run. We operate by a set of principles. We have some hard science that has led us to where we are. We have refined implementation practices over time to where I would dare say that we are, the way that we implement this model is probably providing leadership within our industry at this stage of the game. And we also have a quality assurance protocol. So as you do reading with MST, you'll see that we are guided by a set of principles. And the reason for this is that we could never develop a cookbook way to treat young people because the specific influences that may cause us to understand one young person's behavior may not help us at all to understand the next young person's behavior. And that can be true even in the same family. For example, the reason that an older kid in the family might use drugs is because his friends do, but the younger sibling in the family might use drugs because his big brother does, and he wants to be just like his big brother. There's similarities, but there's also significant differences in how you would manage the same appearing behavior, but the reason for the behavior is really quite different, even in the same family. And so you'll see it would be a good idea as you do your research to read what each of these means in terms of how it relates to building an intervention plan and implementing this treatment model. So we need to be positive, we need and strength focused, increase responsibility of all people involved, keep everything real. It has to be present focused. People have to understand why they're doing what they're doing. It has to make sense to them, and it has to be meeting goals that they themselves are completely bought into. We look at various sequences of behavior that lead up to the problem behaviors or conflicts within the family or what have you. We look at this as a developmental process, not just for the young person, but for every family member. We have to help people develop the kinds of skills and relationships that are needed. It requires continuous effort, but then what about raising kids doesn't require continuous effort? So we're changing the way people do business. We're not just doing one time and get it done interventions. We're doing interventions that change the way the family does business. And everything has a method, and this is very behavioral in nature. There's a way to evaluate and be accountable for getting positive outcomes from everything that we do, so that by the end of treatment, the family can function just as well with the therapist absent as they do with the therapist present. Just to touch on the science a little bit, the science of MST began in the 1970s, and it wasn't until the 1990s that we began really implementing MST in communities. But this just gives you an idea of how much research that has gone into developing MST, and that it's not just enough to pay attention to that they did a lot of research, but understand that not only do we do research, but we're doing randomized trials that are published in major peer-reviewed journals, meaning that other people are looking at this to see how good the science is, and that people who didn't invent the model also have done independent evaluations, and all of those evaluations go into to what we say is our best understanding of how well this model works, what are its strengths and limitations. So let's get into the implementation side for a little bit, and that is that when you build an MST program, it's implemented in the context of a team the team has no fewer than 2, no more than 4 therapists, plus a clinical supervisor. And a single therapist works with between 4 and 6 families at a time. And from the family's perspective, that therapist is the single point of contact. So we're not having one person do something, another person do something else, another person do something else. We train the therapist to be able to manage a broad array of challenges that may be presented with any given family. We have an on-call system that's staffed by the MST team. That means that MST, from the family's perspective, is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This scares a lot of people because they say, oh my God, nobody would ever want to do this. But what we've found is that the bigger problem is getting families to actually use an on-call system when they need it, not to abuse it when they don't. And what we want as a result of this is if something is happening Saturday night, we would rather know about it Saturday night and have an opportunity to do something about it with the family as opposed to reading about it in the police blotter Monday morning. And so this again sets us apart from some types of programs because this is part of our strategy to ensure that families engage in this treatment and that there are not systemic and programmatic barriers that might prevent them from doing so. Typical treatment is 3 to 5 months. I think we're within a standard deviation of 120 days, almost all the way across the MST world, which is right now about 550 teams in 32 states and 15 countries outside of the United States. The work is not done in an office, but it's actually, we go where the problems are. So if a young person is experiencing problems in school, we'll go to the school, oftentimes with the parent, to get a good understanding of the context in which those problems occur. We go into the home. We look at the relationships with people, family members, extended family members. We look at the challenges in the community and so forth. The whole notion is that we have to understand from the perspective of the parent what it's going to take. And we also know if you think about neighborhoods where there are high crime, understand that even the toughest neighborhoods have families where the kids turn out okay. So we want to make sure that our kids that we work with are some of those kids that turn out okay. So how is MST implemented? We deliver all the services. We want to be the one-stop shop. There are exceptions to that, such as for medical services and so forth. But we don't, if the parents are having marital problems, we need to be ready and willing and able to be able to solve those problems. We have a never-ending focus on engagement, as we stated before. We have a very strong track record of both satisfaction and ongoing engagement. One of the things in our community, and this is part of one of the discussions that we'll have with your stakeholders, is with these families, somebody needs to be in the lead role around decision-making. It doesn't mean that we become autocratic decision-makers. For example, we can't take over the authority of a probation officer or a judge, but we can certainly insert ourselves into the decision-making process so that we can offer up solutions that might not put the young person at risk of greater harm because of the implementation of some type of a sanction for a new behavior or something like that. So we need to be in that sort of in the middle of things, if you will. The next item talks about our quality assurance protocol. I won't go into a lot of detail because of time factors today, but understand that this is where we try, we already know, we have good, strong evidence that we're doing something that can work. We have strong research, strong on-the-ground evidence that MST can work, but we know it doesn't work for everybody. But what we do know is that if we can get accurate measures of the fidelity in which MST has been implemented, which we have the tools to do that, we do have hard evidence that when MST is done better, the clients turn out better, which is an amazing fact because we can reduce crime by more than 25% just by having the therapist do their job correctly. And we can, the statistics are even more powerful for the supervisor's role, and that's probably because one supervisor can influence multiple therapists and therefore have a greater role in the success of the implementation. But the thing to remember here is that if we do it well, our clients will turn out better. Therefore, ethically, we must do everything possible to be able to do our jobs well, and that's what this system is based on doing. This is kind of a complicated slide that you're looking at now. This is the in the stage of the various measures that we use, but understand that the way that we collect data for adherence measures is that we ask the recipient to respond to what it is that they're receiving. So the family reports on what the therapist is doing. The therapist actually reports on what the supervisor is doing. The therapist and supervisor report on what the MST expert consultant who provides guidance and training to the team reports on what that person's doing, and all of us up and down the food chain all have some type of plan in place that takes, no matter how good we are, we look for opportunities to up our game and improve our skills. And everybody benefits from that all the way up to the very top. And so that's part of what our assumption is. So we have something that we know works. We have a way to measure the degree to which it's being implemented so that we can improve as we go, take new therapists, bring them up to speed, take new teams and provider agencies, bring them up to speed, and on a continual basis help them do better. We don't have, our protocol for the enabling context of the community is one that oftentimes falls to the provider of MST to manage and negotiate those relationships. So the approach that we take is that we work through the team to be able to understand who those, work through the agency as well, to understand who the people in the environment are that need to be part of that enabling context, and then we help craft the kind of relationship that will work for that. So I'm going to shift gears for the next few minutes, and that is I'm going to talk about if you are a provider agency thinking about doing this, what will that process look like? And it usually starts with a feasibility study, and that means is that you'll collect some information, find out what it costs to do this, find out what the reimbursement is, and all that sort of stuff. Compare it with the services that your agency already provides to see if it's a good fit for your mission and your values. And then once you've made a decision that this is good for you and you want to apply, let's say that you're selected, we would come in and help you develop these specific procedures and components of the program. We would assist with staff recruitment and program startup and then operations. To dig deeper on each of these, the feasibility study talks about target population. We would help you build a financial plan so that you can know what it's going to cost to do this and be able to compare that and understand what it's going to take to be able to generate the kind of revenue necessary to cover your cost. And then we have to, we'll go with you and go through those things that you would be committing yourself to do, so you can make that decision as to whether that's something that you're willing and able to commit to. And below here we have some examples of the stakeholders that need to support this. Police, courts, probation, mental health, schools and vocational programs, recreation. Think of the stakeholders as, if you'll think about that social ecology of the young person and identify the systems that they are now involved with, and then also have an eye toward, ideally, what do we want them to be involved with? So right now they might be involved in a peer group that is using drugs and skipping school. What we want is for them to be involved with a peer group that has positive recreation activities and has a level of engagement in their schoolwork that gets them there every day and gives the school an opportunity to actually do their job. So in order to do that, we've got to have a relationship with the schools. They have to be able to to take a young person that might be at risk of exclusion and be willing to work with us to keep that young person included. We might have to work with your recreation options to be able to take a young person that they may have said, no, that's a bad apple, we don't want them involved, and do what's necessary to be able to change that system so that they know they're not getting dumped on, but rather they're going to bring in kids with normal, regular recreation activities and know that there's going to be a supportive family and a supportive environment to help this kid get actively engaged and involved, and get rid of some of the barriers that oftentimes happen, such as money for uniforms on a team or an instrument in a band or whatever. Those are all things that we can work together to ensure happens. When we look at stakeholder support, to dig a little bit deeper on that, the stakeholders all have to be committed to success. So we have to have an agreement on what the desired outcome is across the board. We have to have an agreement on not only who the kids are that are going to be identified, but a very specific process for getting those kids into the program so that the kids who need it the most will have the best access, and the program will be able to operate at its best efficiency by getting, at any point in time that there's a space available in the program, that we have a way to identify the kid that's both available for treatment at that point and is at the most need for the treatment at that point in time. So how do we get referrals? How do we manage this clinical leadership that I spoke of? And how do we coordinate interventions? How do we manage information? This information management, there are so many firewalls that are set up to prevent sharing of information for confidentiality purposes, and we recognize that. But we have to be able to work together to legally and ethically be able to share the kind of information in order to be sure that we're not working at cross purposes and so forth. So that there is a way to do that, and everybody knows that you've done that with other programs. It's true here as well. We need to have a way also to evaluate the program, because if you're going to implement a program, we want to state up front what the expectations are. How are we going to be judged? We're not going to just be judged because we provided a bunch of services. We want to know how the kids that receive those services turn out. So if you're targeting a population of kids that are 70% likely to drop out of school, we want to know that that same population of kids, that the actual data says that we were able to cut that school dropout rate by a significant percentage. And we have to define what that means, because it's sometimes different from every community and sometimes even different from every school, because schools, because of their location and circumstances, oftentimes have a very different kind of population of kids that are involved. So you kind of get the idea of the program review, conflict resolution, ensuring that there's good financial support and that there's a group of people in the community that care and are paying attention. We often refer to them as a steering group, but that can take many different forms. So when we're developing components, we're developing that the criteria for referral, the referral process, the evaluation plan, and those stakeholder relationships that we talked about. When we get into the actual staff recruitment, we know that some people have backgrounds that are more suited for this type of work. For example, somebody that has training in marriage and family therapy oftentimes comes in already thinking in ways that are compatible with our program. We can help with things like compensation analysis, advertising, interviewing, screening, selecting. We actually take a material participation in who you're going to have on staff to try to aim to hire those people that are going to do the best job right out of the gate. And then once we have the program, the people hired, the program components are built, the stakeholder relationships are in place, and we're ready to start up, then there's this crazy, I love this graphic here of the girl screaming. It's that, okay, we've got to start receiving referrals now. Everybody has to have their telephone in place. The offices are set up. We're getting enough referrals that we're starting to fill up caseloads. We're getting the billing system is operational. We have publicity where it needs to be, and we have an ongoing problem-solving process that means that we have the greatest likelihood to start this program up in a healthy way so that we can be as productive as possible, as quickly as possible, and as efficiently as possible. And as we're operating the program, we want to keep an eye on the finances. We want to keep an eye on the quality assurance. We want to keep good staff there and keep them engaged in wanting to do this program for longer and longer and longer. We need to manage the communications, internal and external, and that's usually how are we going to communicate with our referral sources, how are we going to communicate, and so forth. And then we provide weekly support in the form of a review of every case every week. MST expert looks it over. We implement a weekly consultation supervision protocol, and then every quarter we'll come to the site and actually conduct a training program that's specifically geared for the quality improvement needs of the staff. And that is an ongoing, the weekly consultation and the quarterly booster trainings are all part of it. And once the staff are hired, they're going to go through a 5-day orientation as well. So I'm saving the next part of this time for any questions that people have or any concerns that you'd like to voice, and I'm going to turn the reins back over to our moderator. And are there any questions? And everybody can, I assume everybody can come off mute now?
No, everyone can stay on mute. If there are any questions, if you could just type them into the box and we can look at those as we go. A couple of pieces of information that I did want to be sure to point out, a couple of things I might have omitted in the introduction and just a couple of comments along the way. But I wanted to clarify that, again, the process of looking for intensive in-home services is to, as Marshall alluded several times throughout the conversation, is to obtain better outcomes with the youth and families we are serving. In no way, shape, or form does that mean we will not have a need for out-of-home placement. We will continue to have a need for a select group of kids who may need a short stay out of home or may have intensive treatment needs that may require that, but I do not want to at all imply that out-of-home services will be diminished in any way. The other piece I wanted to respond to, Marshall, and I think this was early on in the conversation, and I don't know if anyone is on the line from Medicaid, so maybe we could get this clarified. But there was a comment, Marshall, about youth have to be system involved as the only way they can receive the services. And I'm not quite sure about the accuracy of that statement. And so if we don't have a Medicaid representative on the line to clarify that today, we will get some further clarification. And as you will also read in the RFQ, is the state plan amendment to include multisystemic therapy has not yet been approved by the feds, so things ebb and flow with that process. But I will say that for youth, obviously, to be funded and paid for with probation funds, they would be required to be within the probation system. But we will definitely check on how the state plan amendment is written for any other Medicaid clients that might be eligible for that type of service.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful.
The timeline for the announcement and the award, Cindy, the RFQ is looking at, it is out currently, it is posted. The responses are due August 17th, and we will be looking at, there's a two-phased process with this. Is first off, what providers might be qualified to provide the service, and then, for example, if our first area that we're looking at is the Douglas County, Omaha metro area. And so if we had 10 providers that met the qualifications to provide service there, we would then have to have some further delineation about how many teams, which providers best met that. So after an initial qualification to go on a qualified provider list, we would then select providers to move forward to the full-fledged training requirements for the service and full implementation of that.
Yeah, and I'd like to say something about the sort of the selection process. Is one of the things that we've done is to identify how many kids in a given area, based on the juvenile justice statistics at least, how many kids in a given area might be potential targets for this type of service. And what we're wanting to do is to ensure that we don't have an oversaturation of this service in a given area to where the individual providers can't get enough referrals to be able to keep their program financially sound. So we're trying to manage that saturation process, and what that usually results in is in a given area, we might start with one provider, and then if we see opportunities for growth and expansion based on the identified demand for the service, there may be opportunities to grow it at a later time. But the last thing that we want to do is get a bunch of different providers in the same area selected, trained up, and trying to compete with each other when there's just literally not enough kids that need this level of service. And then they all end up failing for a reason we could control ahead of time.
Yes, great. Thank you for that additional clarification, Marshall. Drew, the website the RFQ is posted on is the Nebraska Judicial Branch. If you scroll to the very bottom of the page, it has a hyperlink that's contracting opportunities. Click there and you will find it. It will also be posted on the Court Improvement website either later today or sometime tomorrow. And then, as I mentioned earlier, an email with the link and the PDF to that RFQ will go out today as well for providers. So you should hopefully be enmeshed in that and be receiving multiple communications about that. The question about the managed care process and the reimbursement for the new companies that will come into play, that will be all funneled through the Medicaid state plan amendment at this time. It is my assumption that those companies will reimburse per the Medicaid guidelines that are being established right now. I know that there is some information out for public comment through Medicaid surrounding the rate. And Kelly, can you remind me what that rate sits at currently? $38.28 per 15 minutes. $38.28 per 15 minutes. It's billable in 15-minute increments. And so I would envision, Drew, that that's what the other companies will take on as the reimbursement. But again, as that process moves forward with the state plan amendment, public comment and finalization and all of those types of things, that is yet to be finalized. The question about new providers being sought in the eastern Nebraska, hopefully the Marshall's explanation answered that with saturation in numbers. We are really looking at a little bit more intentional approach to this and layering our teams as we move forward so that we can learn what that startup time looks like and not to oversaturate the market so that we have a bunch of providers sitting waiting for referrals and not enough children to send to those services. So we're really looking again at the numbers and as we move forward how the process rolls out. So I apologize we don't have anything more definitive, but we really want to be deliberate and intentional about ensuring sustainability is key to the process.
Yeah, just one comment about MST and as the model is set up. Because of the on-call system and because of the nature of the seriousness and immediacy of the problems that the youth and families are experiencing, we're asking that therapists who work for MST do MST as their only job. And that's in order to be able to be responsive to the needs of the families that they serve. But as an organization, there's an implication of this, and that is that as you build a budget and you know that those have to be full-time and dedicated employees, they can't have other responsibilities in the agency, they have to do MST full-time. The implication of that is that you can actually develop a fairly predictable fixed cost of doing business. and that cost is not likely to change dramatically over time. However, it also requires that you have enough business that you can keep those people busy and keep those reimbursements rolling in. And so our limiting the number of providers is a form of protecting whoever is selected from being brought to financial crisis because of something, again, that we can actually resolve beforehand.
All right, this is a repeat. The RFQ is currently posted on the Nebraska Judicial Branch website. If you scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, there will be a blue hyperlink that says Contracting Opportunities, and if you click on that, it will be located in there. It will also be sent out to providers via email, as well as posted on the Court Improvement website either later today or tomorrow. What other comparable programs is probation seeking or promoting other than MST? The grant that we are currently involved in for the community and evidence-based services process is looking at the rollout of the multisystemic therapy program, as well as the Boys Town model. There is potential in the future. There may be functional family therapy rolled into this, but as in my understanding is the state plan amendment will allow for that, but that is not something that we have written into the grant for this particular opportunity, statewide training and those types of initiatives, and then all of our other services that probation seeks as usual for other therapies, intensive outpatients, in-home, any other in-home services, IFP, all of those other services still exist through our fee-for-service voucher system. Lana, that is correct. There is a two-step process in first completing the RFQ and then being qualified to be on a provider list. Additional conversations will then take place given a particular area. If there are multiple vendors in that area that are qualified to provide the service, to see which provider or providers would be the best fit for that area. And ensuring, I think, and Marshall, if you want to add any piece to this as well, I know this is something we've talked a lot about, really just ensuring that all the details and nuances are understood and that providers are agreeable and capable to moving forward to that training process, because I think sometimes as we look at this, the details there are a lot of details, and so the further you get into the conversation, sometimes in the past providers might have thought initially they were interested, and then as more details were available, that decisions were made that maybe it wasn't viable for them to provide the service. So those are the conversations that would transpire then for that second phase.
Right. This is the equivalent of building a business plan, and that is, if you start a business and you haven't done any planning ahead of time, shame on you. And what we're doing is we're setting up a very concrete way for you to be able to evaluate what is it going to take to do this, evaluate your own agency to determine if this is something that really is a good fit for you and your mission, and also to give you enough information about the business side as well as the clinical side of this to allow you to make a good decision on your part. And then as we have multiple providers coming in, that we're also going to look at the characteristics of each provider and where do we think that we have the best likelihood of a highly successful implementation. And so there's planning that goes on at all levels, and we're here to ensure that if you want to do this and are selected to do this, when you start doing it, there's not going to be any surprises, he said. That's one of those things. Sometimes there are, but our process is to ensure that surprises are either non-existent or incredibly minimalized.
Great, thank you for that. And Lana, the second part of your question, timeline, is we're looking at the Omaha metro area first, And best case scenario is, and we've walked through these timelines multiple times and have edited them along the way, but the best case scenario is that by the end of this year we would have training and some true implementation happening, so other areas would follow that probably early into 2017. And I see one more question coming, actually maybe two, so we'll go ahead and wrap up there. I know it is after 2 o'clock, and that is what we were scheduled for, and that's actually not a question. So thank you all for your participation, and we will continue to collaborate and engage because this is a very new process. There are lots of questions that come up along the way, and so we are excited about the opportunities to partner and be able to have an additional service in Nebraska with some sustainability that's an option for youth and families, and to absolutely improve the outcome for those that we serve. So thank you all.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Bye-bye now.